Stephen.
Andrew.
Do you fancy spending a quiet night inside number 9?
No. Do you know how many times people ask me to do these podcasts? Not doing it anymore.
Okay, see you later. Oh, you're still here?
I'm still here.
You want to do a podcast?
Yeah, let's do a podcast.
Cool, great. So that was relevant because we're going into Simon Says or Simon Says. I get the impression, having listened to the Inside number 9 podcast, that Steve is a Simon Says sort of
No
person.
one ever calls that game Simon Says.
No, they don't.
No one ever says.
But
ever says.
He kept checking him. He kept saying it through the podcast and then checking himself. Simon Says.
No.
Yeah.
No one says. No one says that.
No. So Simon Says. Yeah, this is our follow-up onion dive into the episode, having done the initial immediate reaction one just minutes after it finished airing. And I think this one, probably more than any others, was a little bit of a whoa. That's kind of like the gaze is looking straight at us here.
We felt seen.
Yeah,
very much so.
But not in a. I mean, we got one relevant piece of feedback after that episode. I couldn't find any emails about this one in particular that anyone else had sent. But yeah, we had an iTunes review. This gave us 3 stars and said, "Not for me. Why? Listen to season 6, episode 2. Simon Says. If that episode said anything to me, it was about driving a stake into the heart of not being able to laugh at yourself. Reactions said it all."
I think we laugh at ourselves quite a lot.
Yeah, well, I was thinking you can't get defensive about that and say, "Well, no, we laugh at ourselves," because then
we're doing this.
That's the thing, isn't it?
How am we're trapped in a thing here? Yeah. I don't know what to do.
Like, as much as we laugh about it, I didn't actually genuinely feel any sense of condemnation as a result of that episode. Anyway, like it's.
No.
I think you should go.
Well, I can't go. I said I'd stay here and take notes at the meeting.
There isn't going to be a meeting.
But what about my podcast?
I'm not going to do your stupid fucking podcast. Do you know how many times a week I get asked to do podcasts?
No.
Well, let me tell you, it's a lot. And it gives me great pleasure to say no to every single one of them.
What did strike me was how little they sort of, when they were talking about how little they seem to care about this kind of idea of fans taking over shows, and it didn't feel like they really were, I don't know, frustrated by seeing it happen all the time, and this came from that kind of frustrated place. It was very much a case of this seemed like a good thing to write an episode about.
Yeah,
really. Yeah. There weren't really any things that they really picked out apart from sort of Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
as an example.
Because it wasn't a looking at it from our own perspective. Having happened to us, and I suppose it's very different. Inside number 9 itself is very different because it's not it doesn't have an ending like a series that is all moving towards this climax point that is inevitably, as we said on that initial reaction episode, going to disappoint a certain number of people.
Yeah.
Inside number 9 is not like you might get that at the end of an episode, but then you can move on to next week.
Oh, yeah. No, that last episode of the series didn't fit in with the rest of the series whatsoever. The narrative arcs really did not come together in the way I was hoping.
Yes.
I think you're watching the wrong thing.
I think you are. So did you sort of get, like, having taken a bit more time over watching it again, did anything sort of stand out that you didn't notice first time?
It was interesting to watch, knowing what was coming in terms of twists and things, and it became a lot more obvious where things were being deliberately badly acted, and that kind of thing. I saw again kind of the ability to do bad acting.
Yeah.
So good. They're really good at acting bad acting.
Which bits in particular was that?
The when Simon's doing his audition towards the end, it becomes so obvious that is some deliberately overhammed up bad acting when he's delivering those lines as he's stabbing Gavin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. I do remember, and the fact that the lines that he says become quite obviously vaguely tied to the themes of the episode itself, but actually more about what's going on in the Ninth Circle.
Yeah.
Coming back to that and go, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that was all a hammed up dramatic performance.
But it also works, like, because when you watched it the first time, or when I watched it the first time, it felt like this is just what he's saying because he's so obsessed with the show.
He's lost in it, and so
exactly.
that's how he speaks about the show. And that was the main one, but also his bad acting when he's reading out the lines on the podcast.
My family have been wronged, Dante. Is this nothing? You call this nothing? For 3 winters now, our fields have remained fallow, and so I ask you, nay, I demand, where is your justice now?
And the first person to tweet me what episode that's from will get a circumventing badge in a word search.
Also, that podcast was a really weird way to have that whole conversation.
Yeah.
The entire conversation that it's almost as though he was trying to force Spencer down an avenue and have this conversation in front of everyone, but in a way that would make more sense if it was a live broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a live broadcast, Spencer would probably feel a bit more trapped into that conversation and going, okay, I don't really know what's happening here, but loads of people are listening to this right now. But in reality, that could have all just disappeared. There was no need for that to be a podcast.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
And he also had all of his podcasting equipment with him.
I made a note, like I didn't even think about that the first time. Yeah, it's like 2 microphones. It's got all his computer gear. Yeah.
How about you?
Well, just picking up on that, I think that there's probably something around the kind of power play, or the power dynamics that are at play, especially for Simon. When he says about when Spencer invites him to stay the night, and he says, the fans are going to be so jealous. And it's almost his relationship with the show, with Ninth Circle. The reason he's got a podcast is like he talks about like doing it for the community, but actually nothing that he does is for the community. It's for people to see him.
He's the queen bee.
The queen bee of the community. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and then for him to then be in that position where he's got Spencer wrapped around his little finger, and he's demonstrating that through the podcast for people to listen to. The other part of that was the poll, and what was the circulars is the name of the people.
Is that what
in the
they're
community,
called? The circulars.
And the poll of should Simon be able to start to. Oh, it was should he be able to audition?
Yeah.
It wasn't even should he be in it. Should he be able to audition?
He's a very reasonable man. He doesn't think that he should just be handed the part on a plate. He understands that it's an audition process that he has to go through.
And 13% of people didn't think he...
That's an eighth of his listener base.
Yeah. It's and then that's pretty much the moment then that Gavin comes the next morning, doesn't he? And then that's when the audition actually starts. And it's like
I think that Gavin seems to be sort of listening on the outside to this stuff that's going on, because the podcasts are clearly being put out, and he's putting his polls out, and he's saying that he's working with Spencer, and he's got this close access to him. And Gavin's probably feeling a bit like, this is all about you, isn't it, Simon? I'm not massively comfortable with how this has gone. Because you're right. This is about Simon's relationship with the show and him exerting that power, being the queen bee and showing off that he's managed to get himself this access. And Gavin at this point is thinking, no, this does not sit right with me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I need to go and have a chat with Spencer, which starts the whole thing crashing down.
Yeah. But then that is also a part of the acting, isn't it? So
Yeah.
how much of that?
I guess he brings Gavin back in again when he needs Gavin again. Gavin is sort of like his little prop, his meat prop, where he gets to bring him in to get the access to Spencer in the first place, then bring him back in when he needs to run his audition.
Yeah.
I mean, watching it again and the whole setup at the beginning where Simon suggests that maybe he should go to the police and explain to them what he saw, but then comes into the flat and says, "All right, I've moved the body. I've dumped it in the Thames. It's fine." What part of Spencer go? I mean, I guess he's probably a bit thrown off by the whole situation and in a bit of a panic. But those two things do not add up.
It's like, but even when you're watching it, it's only when you go back and sort of think there's a lack of continuity there in terms of this story that they've written for as the plot of the setup.
I think you probably need to rethink that, Simon, because if you go to the police right now and tell the full story of everything you've just seen, you might be in a spot of bother.
Yeah. And then is that maybe, as you say, it's either the kind of emotional kind of fog that has come and Spencer's not able to say, hang on a second, you said this, but you've moved the body, like I haven't touched the body. Is it a kind of insight into Spencer's writing abilities?
Yeah, maybe.
It's like a little commentary on that. Because you see that a few times, don't you, through where it's like, is he a good writer? You know, like a lot of, well, nobody liked it apart from the Sydney
Morning Herald.
That was the only
big fan, 5 stars.
The only publication that enjoyed the end, or the whole of that last series. And then he gets his mojo back literally by stealing all of these ideas that, you know, he's banging on about how like fan fiction is awful and all of this stuff, and actually it's proved in the end like Gavin and Simon in the end have got what they wanted, apart from the fact they're both dead.
That's true.
Yeah.
They got their ending with the ending.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And another series to boot. We've got nine series.
Nice is that, why would that not have been the initial outset from the beginning? Because I imagine it was for this program.
Yeah.
We'll do 9 series.
That would feel like a lot, wouldn't it, before you've started doing anything?
Oh, it really would.
Oh, 9 series, 6 in each series.
54.
We're going to have to come up with...
Plus the Halloween.
Really different things every time. Yeah. Oh, you don't want to think about that at the outset.
No. You're right.
Don't worry. I sorted it for you. No one will ever know you even touched him. I have to say, though, he did have a point.
What do you mean?
Well, what he was saying about season 7.
Not this again.
Well, some people did think the ending was...
We always knew the ending was going to be deliberately low-key.
Or boring.
It wasn't boring. It was diminuendo.
Also, the amount of blood on him suggests he got quite close to Gavin's body at some point, and I'd like to know how that kind of all played out. Did he throw him on the cobbles or something, and then go and check on him and see if he was okay? I mean, Gavin kind of says, "I thought you would have heard me breathing, but you did a good job."
Yeah, yeah. You must have been absolutely hammered. Yeah.
I do like Scottish Nick Mohammed, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that the Gavin character is a really genuinely, like, I don't think he's acting the nice stuff. I think that's genuinely who he is as a fan.
But yeah, he's very earnest, and he very clearly wants to forcefully but respectfully get across his point of view that a lot of this is down to the fan base, because they're the ones that watch the program, buy the tickets to shows, who buy all the merchandise and keep this thing rolling.
Spend £60 on a selfie.
And this is the other side of looking at it. I guess, is that I know we spoke a lot last time about the kind of the toxic side of this, where people do lose the plot about plots, and people do sketch out completely at the idea that something hasn't finished the way that it's ended, that they wanted it to. And there's those sort of toxic attitudes in the podcast stuff when they've got the comments from the message boards and stuff saying they ruined my show.
Yeah.
and the kind of the taking ownership and demanding something from someone else's art and feeling like you're owed something.
Yeah.
Then there is a flip side to that, I guess, in that if you do become a reason for that show perpetuating, because that wouldn't have got 7 series if no one was interested. And they have provided a source of income for Spencer for 7 series worth of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The only reason that a show would get recommissioned is, yes, it has viewers, but also it's making money from those extra stuff, like the merchandising, like all of that, the kind of bits and bobs around it, which is in some ways, I suppose you see even with Inside Number 9 itself, like, you know, the release of the script books and those other things that come along, and DVDs at the heart of it in the olden days. And that, you know, it's that sort of Disney Star Wars. It was Jim Henson, wasn't it, who was really a big, he went big in on merchandising and like basically turning all of your characters within something, thinking how, like, what merchandise is going to come out.
How will this play out as a little figure?
Yeah. And so the companies, the production companies, like,
have that in mind,
licking their lips if somebody comes to you with something that's like, yeah, there's all of this potential for, you know, third party selling and stuff.
I guess that it then becomes a case of whether, when that all happens, are you as a consumer a passenger with that, and you have to be comfortable in that role, and because at the end of the day it is your choice to engage with that or not, and you don't necessarily have a right to kind of push that direction because you ultimately do have a choice. But if I know there's a difference between, I guess, emotional investment and time investment versus financial. But then does that mean to say that you only deserve a say in the direction of these things should you put money into it? Is it a case of, I've bought tickets for this, I've paid 60 quid for selfies with you, I've bought all this, the Art of the Ninth Circle book, therefore I'm financially invested in enough that I feel like I do have a right, versus the fan who doesn't do any of that, plows hours and hours and hours of time of watching, of recording podcasts about it, and all those sorts of things, that you suddenly feel self-righteous about it, and as though you have a right to insist that this goes where you want it to.
And you don't, do you? Like,
you don't. No, you don't.
It's a weird kind of, I think it's a bit like sport, I suppose, in some respects, isn't it? Like the way that you invest yourself in a sports team, like you support a team, you want them to achieve so that you can enjoy the success, like, and their success feels like your success, or things going right feels like, yes, this is, I have been invested in this in some way. But equally, like, you can't demand anything in terms of the outcome.
But supporting a club whose fan base generally does feel very let down by the way that the club is run, you do hear that argument. You do hear that exact argument of, we invest blood, sweat and tears into this, as well as the match day revenue that we generate by turning up, buying drinks, buying merchandise, all those things. And so that means that this should be geared towards what we want to see happening on the pitch. So you do have a similar thing there with sports, that you do hear that as well.
No, that's true. That is true. And I guess it's more the absurdity. So it's almost, so that mentality has maybe shifted into the entertainment sphere because of the immediacy of it. Like Reese talks about it on the Inside Number 9 podcast of like people reacting to, he's quite blunt about, when people are watching a show and tweeting about it before the show's even finished. He's like, you're not tweeting about, the only reason you're tweeting is because you want your tweet to be seen by others, and it's really narcissistic, and like it's about you, not the thing that you're tweeting about.
What, did you really think I'd revisit my own work and overwrite it with this dog shit?
Thought you liked it.
Well, I had to say that, didn't I? But you've got nothing over me now. I'm not writing any more Ninth Circle. Why would I?
Because for some people, it's more than just a TV show. We only want to celebrate what you do.
Oh, get out.
We should be flattered that we care so much. Think you would have had 7 seasons with that big fan base.
Oh, so suddenly you're the reason for my success, are you?
Well, in part, yes. We're the ones who spend all our money on DVDs and merchandise. We're the ones who go to the conventions and pay, 60 quid for a selfie with Michael Maloney because he was an advocate in season 1. We do it because we care. We're a community of loyal friends that love each other very much. And if you can't see that, Mr. Maguire, then I pity you.
You don't get the same kind of thing when someone reaches the end of a film and is disappointed by the ending of a film, because it's a critic reviews a film and says it started really well, but then the ending just wasn't a payoff at the end. And I guess because it's just a quick 2-hour thing, you can then choose to decide whether or not you're going to go and watch that film. You don't feel let down by the film because I didn't go and see it because I knew the ending was going to be poor because someone told me it was. And even if you do and you feel a bit let down by the ending, it was only 2 hours of your life before it got there. It doesn't feel as much. Yeah. But when you follow a series building the way it does over years and years and years, where nobody knows where that's headed, probably even the writers as well. Yeah. And no one, you don't get that warning. There's no warning in advance that this isn't going to turn out the way you want it to. So don't go. You've got no choice but just to be along with it, I guess. And that's where that sense of frustration comes from.
That's a good. I suppose when you're making a film, you have the entire, where it's going. Yeah. But the idea that the end is the purpose of a TV show is kind of ludicrous. It's like, actually, no, it's the journey of going through, like.
But that's weird though, because I mean, I've never written anything, any sort of fiction or anything like that. So I don't know where my starting point would be, but I almost envisage myself starting at the end, because I can't think of a better way of making sure that all loose ends and things get tied up than starting at the end and working backwards.
But so often with a TV show, you don't know when that end's going to be. So you can't sort of, I guess, reverse engineer the plot to cover a certain number of series, because it's like, well, if it goes well, then we might have another series commissioned and we'll have to, work out where to go with that. So, and there's a chance that it'll get cut short and you'll have to suddenly figure out a way to end it, or
it's just left hanging.
Reveal the killer of Laura Palmer before it's
quick.
Yeah.
You've tampered with a crime scene.
You ran off. I did it for you, Mr. Maguire. Nobody saw me. I was only trying to help.
I was struck by the conversation about tampering with the crime scene. And when he says you've tampered with the crime scene, it's not just tampering with a crime scene, it's getting rid of the body.
It's quite a different full-on accessory to murder stuff, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And then Simon points out that Spencer ran away from the crime scene, which I think is, just as bad as tampering with a crime scene. Yeah. But it was also like, this isn't, when Simon's talking about a crime scene, he's talking about the ending of Ninth Circle. And he feels like Spencer has run away from the crime scene there, and he's having to dump the bodies and fix it. Yeah. So
he's like tampering with,
this is the real crime scene is the ending of this story.
But that's the thing though, isn't it? Is that Simon's entire attitude does not match up with what's just happened. Like when Spencer gets up the following morning and Simon's just really excited to be there cooking him breakfast. He's having a lovely time.
Yeah, he's lost all perspective of the story that they've weaved as like it's like there's this bloke who believes
killed.
this bloke that you're staying in. So the only reason you're staying in this man's flat is because you have footage of him killing someone, as far as he's aware, and you've sort of forgotten that is what's going on for this guy.
The real crime here is the lack of grapefruit, which I was assured you had every morning.
Yes. And that I think in terms of like, I guess one of the big themes through this episode is the sort of power, the ebbs and flows of power and control and who's in charge, like who's writing the narrative, who's like, yeah, where that fits, both in terms of Ninth Circle and the relationship to the work that they're talking about, but also the kind of greater level of this whole situation, which ultimately ends obviously in Spencer killing them both. But I think that really catches Spencer off guard. Imagine waking up that next morning and there's a guy in your kitchen just happily making breakfast, and like it's almost treating you like the guest. And so that kind of ability to flip the sense of control, even if it's just from a point of confusion as far as Spencer's concerned.
Like you said earlier, is really weird because the guy writes a program that sounds like it's all about power dynamics and shifting balances of power and all that sort of stuff. Which means he should kind of be treating it as though he's almost in an episode. Which, by the way, is this the first time that the number 9 has been an abstract TV program rather than a place?
Other than the referee.
Oh yeah,
that was Calvin.
That was a person. Instead.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. It's not an object this time. It's a
no. That was really interesting to hear Christian Henson talking about descriptive versus narrative kind of scoring of music, and how, because the 9 was in the mind of these people, it was bringing that kind of big cinematic fantasy score to a place where it represented what was going on in their heads. Listening to that has made me rethink the way that music works in all of these. Yeah.
And the fact that you're having to experience this as the person inside the 9.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like an unwritten rule about how it's all approached, isn't it?
Yeah. Like you can't deceive the audience with the music. Like the music gives the truth of what's going on in that situation. And so I watched it again and then listened to that podcast and listened to that interview and then watched it again after that. And it was like, yeah, it's so clever. Like it's really insightful to know what's going on with the music there. And the fact that with the fake deaths, they are all very cinematic mind. Yeah. It's all the fantasy mind. It's all, this is fake. And then the real death, or the certainly Simon's death, just the music cuts and it's just this very raw struggle as he's suffering under this pillow.
It was that went on for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a pretty brutal watch, isn't it?
And apparently Reese was actually struggling.
Did nearly die.
Yeah, because they wanted to do one continuous scene without needing to sort of edit it afterwards. And I was struck actually hearing that and then looking at some of the other continuous scenes. Like the opening scene is a really nice one long shot that follows Spencer around
just finding blood everywhere.
Yeah. Which again is, you talked about the quantity of blood and how it's got to all these different places.
It's just dripping. It's just
and it's obviously fake
him.
blood as well, isn't it? So, don't know. Yeah. Did Gavin go over the top with it?
They have like a squirting capsule thing.
And yeah, because it's over his sleeves, and then it's on just all over the floor as well. So
it must be on his shoes when he must have walked it in. Although that wasn't walked in blood, was it? That was like drips of blood.
Yeah,
that were coming off him. Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of blood.
It's a lot of blood.
I did wonder at the beginning whether it was going to be a bit more either supernatural or more psychological, in that the blood that he was scrubbing up wasn't there, and it just kept appearing, and it was almost a bit Macbeth trying to wash it off his hands and it not coming off. And it was going to be that he just couldn't escape the guilt of what he'd just done. But it turns out, no, it was just a lot of fake blood.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to talk about the music.
Yeah, I was going to say, do we need to talk about the music now? Now we're there, do we need to speak about Kraftwerk?
Yeah, because that wasn't even mentioned by Christian Henson. And I wonder whether that's deliberate so if it's an
Don't reveal your secrets.
Because there's a lot of stuff that Steve and Reese don't talk about, like things that you might want to either things that maybe reveal too much from their perspective, or it could be things like the look after you come out the swamp and you look up at the fruit.
That was exactly I was about to say exactly that. I don't fucking know. It was 10 years ago.
Something I always wanted to ask you, Mr. Maguire, if you don't mind. You know when Kata emerges from the swamp in season 1, episode 4, and he looks up at the fruit, what was he thinking then?
I don't fucking know. It was 10 years ago.
That really reminded me, before we get onto the music, reminded me of, have you seen that Friends reunion thing?
Yes.
And how you get like super fans who know everything about the show. And there's something weird that happens with a reunion, and when you talk to people who were involved in making the show, especially the actors, because they don't know things, and so they might not have. There might be certain series they haven't even watched, so they don't actually have any clue what it is that they've done, and that just reminded me of that a little bit, because you kind of have this impression in your head that these things that maybe you've been obsessing over, you've watched hundreds of times, and you've wondered, what does that mean? Actually doesn't mean anything. It's just something you've noticed that was either a passing...
a throwaway thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or an accident.
It takes me back to Year 9 English during ripping apart poetry and going, maybe it was just a blue room. Maybe it was just a blue room.
Yeah. So it could be, but in terms of the score, like I don't believe that it's just an accidental kind of the tune has got into. I don't think he couldn't have got through it without anybody saying it. That this sounds
a bit like
the model.
Kraftwerk.
Yeah,
that's the model.
So I was just sort of looking at the lyrics, seeing if there was anything. So I'm going to read out the lyrics.
This isn't going to become the new, like, everything is communication, is it?
No, I think this is important because it is. Okay. It's, why, unless it's just a great tune. Although weirdly, I was watching the football earlier and heard someone playing it on the trumpet. I was like, maybe it's just following me around. It's not like a chant, is it? I've never heard it being chanted.
Is it like spotting shoes everywhere?
Yeah, it might be. Yeah. So my initial reaction was to think, is this about Spencer as the model, as this kind of this figure, this symbolic figure that is fairly vacuous in terms of the substance beneath what you like. It's all about what you see and what you believe about this figure, which is obviously the case for Simon and for Gavin, who know the product of what Spencer has done more than Spencer does, and connect with it in a way that Spencer doesn't. So she's a model and she's looking good. I'd like to take her home. That's understood. She plays hard to get. She smiles from time to time. It only takes a camera to change her mind.
They can't see those little knowing glances to camera. This is an audio podcast.
The camera was important. She's going out tonight, loves drinking just champagne. And she's been checking nearly all the men. She's playing her game, and you can hear them say, she's looking good. For beauty, we will pay. She's posing for consumer products now and then. For every camera, she gives the best she can. I saw her on the cover of a magazine. Now she's a big success. I want to meet her again. I don't know.
There's some lines.
Yeah. Could just
some
be a blue
lines
room.
I can get on board with.
Just a blue room. I don't know. Maybe it's just picked because it's a nice melody. Or maybe he does think he's come up with it himself.
Or it's, yeah, maybe he does. Yeah. It strikes me as something that sounds quite good as a little sort of fantasy reworking.
Mm. Yeah, it works really well.
Grandiose and
it's got a sort of haunting element to it as well, doesn't it? Like there's an impending kind of something big is happening here.
It would, however, be one of my top questions to ask Christian Henson if we ever had the opportunity to talk to him.
Yes. Maybe we need to work out how to kidnap him and get him on the podcast.
It was a very niche plot where we faked Andy's death in front of Christian Henson and tried to convince Christian Henson that he was responsible for it, just to get him on the podcast.
And then he answered the question very straight, and took about
I hadn't
5
even thought
seconds.
of it.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, right, fair enough. See
Andy, it's all right. You can get up.
Yeah, hearing him talk about it in those kind of terms, like what you're trying to do with it, in terms of are you revealing something in the mind? Are you kind of setting the scene? Is this about the place, or is this about the person and stuff like that?
And are you the difference between setting a scene for what we're about to experience over what the character is experiencing, which is what he's ultimately trying to do.
What are you doing here, Gavin? You've ruined everything. You couldn't help yourself, could you?
I said I'll be able to have access to him.
Eventually, I said eventually.
I want some time with Mr. Maguire. It's not fair you're having him all to yourself. That wasn't the plan.
Of course it was the plan. You're supposed to be dead.
Loretta, yes. Can you give me a call back as soon as possible, please? Something urgent I have to discuss with you.
I was waiting for him to sign a contract so he couldn't back out of it, dummy.
Yeah, and all the while you're getting to live with him and do podcasts with him. Set yourself up as the queen bee of the fandom.
Yeah, well, I've got an actual relationship with him, not some sort of fantasy world that's all made up. I'm his equal. He respects me, don't you, Spencer?
Doesn't even know you. Just tell him you got Photoshop pictures of him with no clothes on.
Oh, they were DM'd to you in private. It was not for a public forum.
All right, that's enough. No, I don't want to press charges, but unless you leave my property now, I will go to the police.
Spencer, the project.
Even though it's a fiction, what they're doing, what him and Gavin are doing, it's still a truth. When you think Simon's killed Gavin, it comes across as like, okay, Simon's completely delusional to this place where...
There's a line that says, this is just a fantasy world.
And so that world that they've created within this world is a fantasy.
Yeah, within a fantasy.
But the true delusional kind of... deranged and delusional thing is the fact that he's there doing it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so that it does a weird thing to you where you think, oh, it's not that bad because he hasn't actually killed him. It's like, no, he's forced himself into this guy's house.
This is still, he creates sort of layers of relational perspective, whereas like, it's okay. In relation to what you think he's done, this is all right. It depends on where you're coming from, I guess, as to where you're, where the line is for respectable behaviour.
because that fits with Stanning as well. Because I think that's one of the things in Stan is the bloke's ability to implicate Eminem in his fantasy world and then blame Eminem for what he's doing, essentially.
The tea's gone cold. Wondering why.
What the two things? Stanning and the thing where you put characters together.
Oh, shipping.
Shipping, yeah. So making relationships out of... so that's one of Simon. Simon wants to get Carter and Dante together, doesn't he?
Yes,
finally they get together and it's very satisfying.
I enjoy Reese finding out about these things and then immediately being dismissive of them. It's like, this is absurd. This is an absolutely ridiculous idea. The fact that, I guess that's the kind of thing where people just take ownership, not over storylines, but over entire characters in things they watch. I should get to decide the future of these people in this program.
Yeah.
Because I see them as a perfect match.
And it's like, and even just that phrase, like, it's really satisfying. It's like, well, it's really satisfying to you who has that fantasy. Like, that doesn't mean that you will create a successful conclusion, or that the thing that you want is the thing that will be satisfying to everybody else. Like, it's inevitably not going to be the case, apart from the fact that it clearly was the case with their rewrite. Because it's a massive success. But yeah, I was kind of thinking about, there's obviously some weird psychological manipulative moves going on, in the kind of the Misery. It's like reverse Misery, isn't it? Is it? In Misery, is it her house? It is her house,
yes,
isn't it?
Does he have an accident?
Yeah.
And she goes and helps him.
And brings him to her house, yeah. So it's sort of playing out the opposite way around. But yeah, I was thinking, because you have the acting with the plot that's been written within the plot, essentially, the fantasy. The first one is in order to get a foot in the door into Spencer's flat, and then the second one is to get the foot in the door as the audition.
Yeah. I love that it's an audition.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate that first time I watched it, and there's almost something quite innocent and sweet about that.
It reminded me a bit of the American Office, where the character that's the US version of Gareth has a whole thing in the computer game Second Life, and in his second life he is still an assistant to the manager. He can be anything he wants.
Yeah.
And that's what he is. And in Simon's fantasy, he can have anything he wants, but it's just getting an audition.
It's an audition. Yeah. It's not, I don't want the part. And there's almost something.
I should earn this. I need to earn this.
In that, there's almost an insight that the character has that he doesn't realize is important, which is, it's not about getting the thing. It's about the opportunity to have the thing. So it's about the imagining that there is another ending that could be true is more important or more meaningful to him. Like, that's the equivalent of the audition, is actually just writing this thing that isn't what happened.
Do you think that he had any part? Because I know he presents the work as Gavin's work.
Yeah, I was wondering that. I don't know.
It strikes me that Gavin is probably the more creative one of the two, who's actually got a slightly less problematic relationship with the show and just likes to write things in his spare time. And
he's like
Simon is just Simon is just using him, like I said before, as a means to, like you say, get his foot in the door and worm his way into having input into this show, just so he can say that he did.
Yeah.
Or whether they worked together on this.
Yeah, because you don't really, that's not kind of fleshed out properly, is it? Like, in terms of like how much of a partnership is this? There's the moment when Gavin is really appreciative of and excited about working with Spencer.
In a less toxic way.
Yeah, and there's kind of like, okay, now like again, there's a delusion there in not realizing that it's probably not the greatest way to go about forming a partnership.
But he's sort of a bit. He's not. Yeah, he doesn't. He's so innocent. He's
I'm thinking
really
about
innocent character,
and genuinely thinking about the show as well. Thinking like, all I want is to get the show. Like I am confident in my own writing. Like he does have a confidence in his own ability to write good stuff, and he clearly does write good stuff. And so he's
everyone loves it at the end. Doesn't they?
Yeah, so he's sure that this will serve the show. So I'm excited to work in partnership with you in order to, get this thing that we love. And he believes that Spencer loves the show as much as he does. So it's like, well, why wouldn't we be excited about working on this?
And that's the weird thing about the fantasies within the fantasies, because clearly Gavin also has a fantasy here that is a bit detached from reality, in that he must have known how the foot in the door was happening. And yet that doesn't seem to bother him, or there doesn't seem to be any sort of level of empathy as to why that might not make Spencer that forthcoming about working with him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that it is the whole. They talk about the fantasy. So when Simon kills Gavin with the National Television Award,
Chekhov's NTA.
Yeah, as the viewer, you're thinking, okay, his delusion has gone to a whole other level, because he's talking about the fact that him and Spencer have a real relationship, and Spencer respects him, and all of this stuff. And you're thinking, okay, he's just gone to a whole other level.
But he seems to. That's not beyond the realms of possibility for his character that he's built at all.
No,
like, that is entirely believable. That's where that character is mentally at that point.
So he completely believes this fantasy that he's living within, to the point where he's willing to kill one of his best friends, apparently,
or
and then
just part of the hive.
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. Yeah. And then when you realise that, okay, this was not real, they were just doing this as a part of this other thing. My initial reaction is like, oh, it's not so bad. And it's like, well, just because that's not real, it doesn't mean that this isn't real. Like, in terms of the delusion and the kind of deranged approach to all of this stuff is.
But then Gavin doesn't really seem to get that either, does he?
No.
He doesn't really seem to understand what he's just played a part in, and that, considering how Spencer may have reacted to what he was seeing unfold in front of him, which was Gavin dying again.
Yeah, that was picked up, wasn't it? Of you already killed him once.
I've got the video footage of you fighting with Gavin and pushing him down. I've got the notebook in his handwriting, his fingerprints all over the place. It doesn't look good, does it? Come on, Spencer. You've already killed him once. This just makes it more believable.
Obviously, they're like Stephen Reese are then playing with that as an idea of like, yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can. All you need to do is say that it was someone's dream,
yeah.
Which is what they were going for with the show.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one thing that you feel like, no, the writing could get worse than it has been. You start off by saying all of that was a dream. Come on, guys. You must have something up your sleeve that's a bit better than that if this is going to earn you 2 more series of writing.
Yeah.
How's that not going to upset a fan base more?
We're just going to erase a series by saying, yeah, that was a dream. Right. Let's
I know what would annoy me more.
What?
Yeah, being told that everything I'd just seen was actually a dream and this is the real ending. Even if the new ending was better, I'd still be pretty narks that what I'd just seen had been written off as a dream.
Yeah.
And why is the dream so bad?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it is an interesting thing, isn't it? Of like what's different between being told that something was a dream and actually then just being aware that it's not real anyway. Like it is an interesting. like as a thought experiment with any TV show that you get really into, it's like, well, essentially that was just a dream. That was the dream of the creator.
Someone dreamt that up.
All you've done is, this didn't really happen. And how does that feel? Like it's a really, it almost highlights the jarring impact of getting to the end of anything. Because
are you trying to undermine people's visceral emotional reactions to the end of anything?
well, it's like,
guys, you do know none of that was real, yeah? You just sat there at the cinema at the last scene. That's worse than bloopers.
But it does. I think it gives an insight into why you're almost always disappointed with an end.
Hate to break this to you guys, none of that was real. So,
but then that's a stupid thing to say.
Yeah,
it's like, well, obviously. So, what level are we engaging with it? Do you know? I just find it fascinating to think about.
That is what suspending disbelief isn't it? Is losing yourself in something and allowing yourself to be taken along for the ride with something that ultimately, if you have a quiet word with yourself, you realize this isn't. And I guess that's like I said before, the difference between a film that doesn't pay off and a TV series that doesn't pay off is because it's just such a longer thing. Although with a TV show, you do have far more opportunities to have a word with yourself between each episode and go,
you do.
It's only TV.
It's fine.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. No.
He says whilst on a TV show podcast.
You watch something like The Babadook. That took me about 6 or 7 sittings to get through.
So
The Babadook.
you had the opportunity to have a word with yourself.
I did, and I frequently had words with myself, and I was like, "This is not. None of this is and it's still just.
Was it a bit of a
made me shit myself constantly? The reason I had to have so many sittings was changes of underwear. It's a good film.
You see, together we're stronger. We can rule this kingdom forever and ever and ever.
The only other thing was that whole, I guess, the fantasy scene with like the relinquishing of all power, the sexual assault scene, essentially, just before Simon's death, being a real metaphor for what's going on creatively, like within this whole situation, and where you see Spencer has just been stripped of all of his power, all of his, like, everything is drained out of him, as far as you're aware. And it's like, I thought that was a really powerful kind of image of what has just happened to him as a creator in terms of losing all of his autonomy over his show. It's been taken by this stranger and basically just torn apart.
It's really interesting to kind of consider what either of the pair of them thought was happening at that point. And I can't believe that Simon would have thought that.
Yeah.
I think it's the fantasy thing, though, isn't it?
I think that's almost the truth within the lie would be what Spencer is feeling about this, and what is actually going on is, even as you're acting this fantasy out, what you're doing is assaulting this guy you're assaulting this guy's creativity and his whole life's work, whatever, this part of his life's work. You might not even be aware of that, but that is.
Well, I don't think for a second that for Simon that entire sort of sequence there was really all about the audition for him. It kind of morphed.
Yeah.
It was sort of partly that.
Yeah.
But there was more going on there, I think.
Yeah, it felt like there was a...
And you're right. I think it was more of an opportunity for him to exert some power. and more of an opportunity to really show Spencer who was in charge at that point.
Mm.
And I don't know whether he would have gone through with what was being suggested had Spencer not decided to.
Well, I guess Gavin's reaction would suggest that there was going to be a point at which he says,
and
do I get the job? Yeah. So to speak.
We've been doing this too long.
One day, if one of us can't do the recording,
we'll finish each other's sentences.
Yeah, we just one of us can play both parts. Yeah, no, I thought that was an interesting image, and yeah, as you say, like a kind of getting into where that's playing out for each of them psychologically.
Unless Simon is just incredibly method. When he gets into the zone, he's in the zone.
Yeah, yeah. But then, and then Spencer suffocating Simon is almost as brutal and as horrific as it is. There's an element of getting his power back, like his creative autonomy back.
There is,
metaphorically, like not literally.
Yeah, no, there is, but there's also a kind of sense of he has completely lost control of the situation.
Yeah,
entirely, and that ultimately does end up, well, for a brief second, ends up being his downfall, where he loses all control over the situation and loses all of his power there.
Yeah.
But then he does manage to flip that around, but it does involve another murder.
Yeah.
The NTA gets another outing.
It does. And for what it was Chekhovly supposed to do.
Yeah, it was nice that, it was nice that there was the Chekhov plant that you thought had played out but hadn't.
Yeah. It's like,
not properly. Got you.
Good.
The double.
That's kind of, as we said originally, that's how you could tell on some level that wasn't a real murder, because it had been implemented in the un-Chekhov sort of way.
You think it's Chekhov, but not quite.
Yeah. Yeah. And they were talking on the podcast about another the Chekhov's pillow coming out. And I'm glad they got rid of it. So they said there was a missing scene from it, that Spencer comes in with the pillow earlier on, and he looks like he's contemplating killing Simon at that point. Like he's obviously losing control and feeling like, I've got to do something about this. But they said, actually it's a bigger shock at the end, which is true. Because I guess in that moment you think he's completely surrendered everything to Simon, and he's just given over the whole situation and been like, okay, do what you have to do with me. I mean,
that scene is shocking, and I think it works because it's a shock.
Yeah.
Everything about it is shocking.
If you'd have seen him with a pillow earlier on, you'd know he is thinking about it, or he has it in him to do something.
The only Chekhov there is the planting of the homosexual relationship earlier.
Yeah.
That then starts to look like it's about to play out potentially before Flip and Smother.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose, and that's the shipping. There's a shipping forecast.
The shipping forecast.
It was the shipping forecast earlier on.
Pillow over face, smothering entirely.
For forging a relationship between Spencer and Simon. Spyman.
I like it.
Shipping forecast.
That's very good. I like that.
Yeah.
So, how did he get on? Did he get it?
Get what?
The audition. Killing me, seducing you. It's the balanced story arc.
Any thoughts on either what we've talked about here or in our reaction, first reaction, or any thoughts that you have yourself? Then please, we will, as we mentioned last week, do a full wrap-up episode at the end of the series where we'll explore anything that people send our way. So please email us aquietnightinsideKnow9@gmail.com or get in touch on Twitter @AQNIN9. And we look forward to hearing from you. Anything else to add there, Steve?
No, I think it's all.
Well, have a good week. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Did you have a short quote to give me for the press release? One line will do.
Just say I did it. I did it for the fans.